Jealous relative. XL. Reposting this since it was removed from other feed. Sorry for not seeing rules beforehand. _ This is something that has happened to me from about 4 years ago. A relative and I are both self-published authors in our community. Prior to these events, in middle school I had began a story with it being well into 600+ pages at the time. The computer I used back then was really old, a Windows desktop and tower that needed the 3.5 hard disks to save things to. It had been my aunt's who used it for her college classes. It ended up crashing and I ended up losing everything I had been writing. Tossing the computer away, I subsequently lost interest in writing after that. I around 12 to 14 at the time and buried the idea in my mental files for years until just before these events take place. In comes relative, we had got along well and were really close as kids. Though we had our petty childish fights, she was always trying to boss the rest of us around. If she didn't get her way, then she would whine and cry, twist what we said around to play victim to the scuffs and arguments she started. Growing up together, she and I are the 2 eldest of 7 grandchildren. We later found out that her birth father, who passed away when I was 6, had had an affair with a woman he originally intended to marry while being with relative's mother, and she had got pregnant with relative's half-sibling we never got to meet. She, relative, was the outgoing type of person, and I, being the eldest of the 7 kids, have somewhat been the shy, wallflower kind of person, the type that are easily forgotten and overlooked. I was gullible, hanging onto my relative's every word. We shared similar hobbies, gaming, collecting trading cards, etc. She and I also loved to draw, and I at the time had started keeping a portfolio of my drawings, began taking art classes and writing poetry in my English course in high school. Sorry for all my typos and bad punctuation here, by the way. She approached me at some point about drawing up some characters for a novel series she had wanted to do. Naturally, I was curious about it, seeing as we had often LARPed and acted out several of our book fantasies playing in the yard outside before as kids. She explains to me that she would pay me for the services, and at the time I had not been taking digital commissions. Back then I only had done freehand sketches for about $15 to $20. This didn't set well with her when I brought up my payment prices, and she dropped the subject. This happened on multiple occasions, and I ended up dismissing the whole thing after some time. I figured out after the multiple encounters with her that she never intended to pay me and instead wanted my drawings and character art for free because we were family. This was a no-no, and I knew that just because we're family means nothing. I've since adopted something her birth father used to say, family discount, you get charged double. A few months pass by and she begins bragging to me that she's found and hired a book editor online and currently in the process of self-publishing her own books. I tell her that it's pretty cool, and this moment sparks new inspiration in me to pick up my old writings from middle school. After this encounter, I spend the next few days poring over my online profiles to find some of the chapters of my original works, having forgotten about posting them to see what others had thought. Finding them, and now having an up-to-date computer system, I save what I could find to my laptop. Rewriting the first several chapters to fit my current mindset from my teenage way of thinking back then, I end up with well over 130 pages of what ends up being the starting of my first book in a planned series. Over the year, I talk with my relative less and less as she put out more novellas. The news of me writing my own books doesn't set well with her. At this point, her attitude starts to change, and instead of being supportive, she decides to talk down to me as if she's somehow superior because she had published a few books. I let it slide for the time being and bring up that I had worked out a cover for my book as well. She asks to see it and scoffs in my face and loudly rolls her eyes while she's shopping at my workplace, of which I won't post for ramifications. She attempts to antagonize me further by stating that she used a cover site for her books, one that let you use free stock photos, most of which were poor quality and others of better styles were placed behind a paywall. I knew of the site and told her as much. Relative goes as far as to say that if I wanted a real book cover, I should use the site. I tell her right out that my cover was real and I had done it myself. I'm on the clock and realize that we had been standing around talking for too long by then, and we go our separate ways. I don't hear back from her for several more months until she starts handing our family copies of her latest book, which was an amalgamation of short stories. To my expectation, only one story I ended up liking in the small 100-page, if you included the wasted title pages, booklet. She gives my sister, mother, aunts and myself all a copy and asked us when we had the time to go online and leave a review of what we really thought of the book. About a month or so passes, and being busy with work, I set the book aside as I had honestly never cared much for my relative's writing style. In the past, 95% of everything she had written was deliberately drawn out, or was obviously taken from something we had collectively watched or played in a movie or game we had. Turns out that this situation was no different, and in my review, I stated as much, asking that she be careful that a lot of the content was easily identifiable from certain big gaming corporations that make a huge chain of fantasy games. I was not alone in seeing this, as other people commented on this note, having read her current books at this time. Seeing my post, she wasn't having any of it. Immediately she starts spewing that she would sue me for libel, threatened me with a lawyer for posting the review that she had asked for. I held nothing back as I called her out for her inflated ego. Over the next few days I waited to be served with a court date, but nothing came of it and thought it had been over. I go about finishing up my own book, and on Christmas I gift my aunt a copy, free as a gift. Found out later that this same relative had charged our aunt for 2 copies that she had not received yet. My book was literally 3 times the size of relative's book for the same price. Seeing my book, my relative gets up with her family and storms out of the party hosted by said aunt. After this, my relative starts avoiding me at my work, online, in public. I'm completely fine with this until someone who knows my relative comes up to me at my job and shows me a website. Turns out that it was said relative's website promoting her online content. Lo and behold, across the top of the webpage in a small black banner was my name and demanding I stay away from her. This webpage was completely open to the public, and anyone could search the contents would see this. I'm mad at this point, and then my phone dings with messages. Looking at it, I see that a person I don't know has forwarded me a series of screenshots of a long conversation between themselves and my relative. It's nearing my break for lunch, so I decide to wait and read them then. Going through each exchange between the two, I realize that my relative is talking about me and what had transpired on another platform for not loving her book and not giving her a rave review that she feels she's entitled to. My relative calls me a stalker to this person who I shall not name, and outright admits to giving out my personal information online in this same string of messages. The last post from this person to my relative told her that what she was doing was wrong, giving out people's personal information, and that calling someone a stalker for simply using the Yahoo email provider and not liking something they did was utterly childish. The commenter went on to say that they would be screen-shooting the exchange and leaving a complaint with the site moderators. Since this has happened, I found a complaint forum and posted this to hopefully stop my relative's Karen-like entitled antics, and I'm happy to say that as of this post, my relative's site has been terminated and left to expire. Multiple people have came forward, having been done the same way as myself by my relative for seemingly the same situation. I'm also happy to say that she no longer shops at my current workplace, at least that I'm aware of. The best part of all this is that all of the characters my relative asked me to draw her for free are setting in my book series, protected by copyright law. I still have their original concept art in my portfolio, so she can no longer use them in any way. Update: it was my lack of foresight to post this without putting some sort of trigger warning for trolls. I have empathy for others. Yes, I shouldn't have to point out that this is a Reddit Entitled People post, in an Entitled People forum. If this bothers you, do not waste your time leaving comments. I posted this being a direct update to linked post. If you don't like the content of the post, do not comment on it. Adding to this post, as things have come about with further developments regarding relative. Following the above events with regards to relative calling me a stalker online to hundreds of people on her social medias and now deleted website that had been created using Squarespace, I stopped going to any and all social gatherings where I knew she may turn up. These included family get-togethers, holiday outings, birthdays, Thanksgiving, Christmas parties, etc. If we were asked to come over to an event with aunts or other family, before I had even moved from my desk or bed, sometimes I would ask if this particular relative would be there. If they said yes, then I refused to go or would say I didn't feel good. If it was to go out to eat, I would ask that they bring me something back instead of going simply to not be around relative who called me a stalker. I went so far in avoiding my relative that I blocked all social media accounts I knew she had at the time, her brother's accounts, her sister's accounts, her father, mother, and any extended family in the off chance that they might have even the slightest of chances to contact me. This even included me blocked people on various social platforms that had the same name as my relative in the off chance that they might be her. She had multiple accounts and still does. 2 years ago, another of my aunts passed away from COVID in Montana, We had to ship her remains back to Virginia for funeral. This would be the first time this relative and I would be in the same room in over 5 years since her comments of me stalking her. Instead of going to the wake in the graveyard with the rest of the family, I sat in the vehicle to again avoid having any contact with relative. We leave early and don't hear anything for a long while. That is until end of February 2024 this year. Aunt who I gave my first book to contacts me at work saying that this very relative lost everything in a house fire expecting me to give her sympathy. Instead I find myself laughing my ass off that relative finally got her karma after 7 years. Mind you, in the time between aunt's funeral and relative's house fire, family and I have moved 3 or more regions away, and it's now over an hour's drive to even be in the same town as this relative. After our exchange, aunt's defending relative blah blah, and I post online to Facebook about how karma had finally been dished out. I go about my day feeling the best I'd felt in a long time. Evening comes around. I get off work, go home and play video games online until bed around 10:30. I lay down and my phone notifications start going off. 4, 5, 6, 7 notifications from nearly 5 hours prior to me laying down to sleep. We have bad reception, so notifications didn't come through when they had originally been sent. I go to check them and there from the relative I spent the last 7 years avoiding everything to do with. I laugh more and go to try and reply back, but she's already blocked me. She had used an account I was not aware of or missed to contact me after 7 years saying that I stalked her, to leave 7 comments about how I was a shitty person for not fondling over how she was in a bad place and helping her out. For her to have even seen my post to start with, relative would have had to deliberately type my name into the search bar, find my account in a drop-down list, click my profile and scroll down. She deliberately commented on my post instead of leaving it alone. Makes me wonder how many times she'd clicked my name or how long throughout the last 7 years she'd been watching my account. Which one of us is the stalker now? Story 2. Did he have sex with her? Advice. Husband of 30 years worked out of town for 6 months, helping to build a hospital. Together we found an Airbnb for him, a rented room in a much older woman's home. I was okay with it. He and another married guy from work started going to a bar near the hospital. Other guy was staying in his own small trailer. They both hated going back to sit alone in small quarters. I was somewhat okay with it. I mean, he shouldn't have to work all day then go sit alone in a room. He called every evening after getting home from the bar. I felt things were good. He flew home 3 times and we had great visits. After 5 months he tells me he's recently found roaches at the Airbnb and now shares a bathroom with 2 new renters. His coworker knows someone who will rent him another room. When I ask questions he says he doesn't have any details until move-in day, August 1st. I call him on the 1st to see how the move has gone. He says great. I push to find out the situation. He finally says it's in a trailer. Alone or roommate, I ask. After much pushing he admits it's with a bartender from the bar. He realizes I'm going to put him on the spot until I get all the details. He finally says she's a single woman his age and she has worked there for 2 years. So obviously he has known her for months, yet never once mentioned her even though he had told me about other patrons and PPL who worked there. He sounds very drunk as he admits all this to me. I tell him this is completely inappropriate and to please leave and get a motel room now.
I'm heartbroken.
He begs off saying it's far too expensive, the woman means nothing and he loves me. He tells me later she was at work when he got there and he left early for work when she was still sleeping, that they never even saw each other. He stays 2 nights until I book him a motel room for the rest of his stay, which was 2 weeks. He actually thanks me as he said he had no idea I would be so upset, that he should have told me his plans. He said he stayed away from the bar after that, and as we shared locations on our phones I tracked that he was always at the motel after work. I never had any reason to distrust him before and had never used the tracker, but thank goodness we had added that feature. When the job wrapped up and he flew home 2 weeks later, he immediately asked that I find a marriage counselor. He admitted in therapy that he had met this bartender the first day he was in town and went to the bar. He realizes he had a drinking problem by going there every day after work. He admitted they had made plans for him to move in weeks before he did. Again he said he really was trying to save money as she offered a room at a very low price. When the therapist pushed on why he had never mentioned her, he said he just didn't think of it. It's now 8 months later. He has retired at 58 years old and chooses not to go out without me. I get flowers and love notes. He seems genuinely full of remorse for being stupid and lying to me. Of course, he swears nothing happened and that they weren't interested in each other. Am I the one who is stupid for staying with him? I still have zero trust in that I know the whole truth and I'm traumatized by the lies and the fact he knew I was so hurt yet stayed those 2 nights. He definitely micro-cheated, but am I naive to believe he didn't have sex with her?